Lieutenant Arya Hale stood as rigid as steel, her posture perfect despite the burn in her muscles from too many sleepless nights. The fluorescent lights above her flickered with a low, electric hum that seemed to echo the tension in the room. She had barely returned from a mission that had chewed up half her team and nearly taken her with it, yet instead of being debriefed like a respected operator, she had been marched into a conference room with no explanation. Something in the air felt wrong, off in a way her instincts recognized instantly. The men lining the walls watched her with an unsettling mix of judgment and discomfort, eyes darting away when she met their gaze, as though ashamed of the orders they'd been instructed to carry out. Commander Reese Calder approached slowly, his boots hitting the floor with a deliberate rhythm that reminded her of the ticking of a bomb she could not yet see. Once upon a time he had been her mentor, the man who taught her to shoot in the rain and survive with nothing but grit and willpower. Now, his face held none of the warmth she remembered. His expression was carved from ice. "Lieutenant Hale," he said, voice smooth as the blade he was poised to plunge into her back. "You have returned under questionable circumstances. Until the investigation is complete, your conduct will be handled accordingly." Arya kept her breathing steady, eyes locked forward. "With respect, sir, the mission was successful. There should be no questions." A flicker of irritation crossed his features. The room seemed to lean in, waiting for his response. Calder folded his hands behind him and gave her a long, calculating look before delivering the command that made the air freeze. "Take off your uniform." A few officers stiffened. Someone looked away entirely. Calder didn't blink. He expected her to break, to show shame, confusion, fear. He wanted her smaller than she had ever been. Instead, Arya lifted her chin a fraction, recognizing the trap for what it was. Public humiliation, a forced surrender. She let a small smirk tug at the corner of her mouth. "You just told a Navy SEAL to strip," she said, her voice quiet but razor-edged. Silence dropped like a hammer. With precise, unhurried movements, she removed her jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table in front of her. If Calder wanted to tear her down, he would soon learn the truth. Arya Hale didn't shatter. She sharpened. Arya didn't go home that night. Not at first. She walked the perimeter of the base for over an hour, boots crunching on gravel, her mind replaying every second of the confrontation. Calder's order, the stairs, the silence. The entire scene had been choreographed. He wanted her disgraced. He wanted her vulnerable. And the worst part was how meticulously the pieces had been arranged, almost as if her downfall had been planned long before she stepped off the plane. That realization chilled her more than the cold air biting at her skin. When she finally reached her apartment, the darkness inside felt heavier than normal, as if the walls themselves knew what she was about to uncover. She locked the door, sat on the edge of her bed, and powered on her encrypted field tablet. It was forbidden to keep after deployment, but she'd learned long ago that survival often required ignoring rules written by men who never saw combat. Her fingers flew across the screen as she pulled up the logs from Operation Tidefall, the mission that had nearly killed her and cost 3 teammates their lives. The data didn't lie. She stared at timestamps, route details, and drone feed coordinates that perfectly aligned with her sinking suspicion. Their ambush site had been compromised before they arrived. Enemy forces had been waiting with impossible precision. Someone from her side had fed them information. Her stomach twisted as she scrolled through communications relayed during the mission, and then she found them. Encrypted messages tagged with identifiers she recognized too well. Calder's codes. Calder's clearance. Calder's orders. Her throat tightened, though not with fear, with fury. He had tried to bury her in a foreign jungle. The humiliation earlier was simply the follow-up strike, intended to finish what the ambush had failed to do. But the blow that hurt the most came when she turned off the tablet and stepped into her living room. Evan was sitting in the dark, elbows on his knees, his face washed in the faint glow of the streetlights bleeding through the blinds. Something about his posture, too still, too measured, put her instantly on alert. "Arya," he whispered, like her name was an apology. "We need to talk." Her pulse slowed, heavy and wary. He looked up, and guilt was carved into every line of his face. He confessed in pieces, each word slicing deeper. He had been meeting with Calder. He had shared small details about her routines, her concerns, her mission schedules. He framed it as a harmless exchange at first, until Arya stared at him with that unblinking seal gaze that tolerated no half-truths. In the end, the truth spilled out. Money, promises of career advancement, and Stoneway Tactical offering him a position if he helped them monitor her. Evan had thought it was harmless. He hadn't realized they wanted her dead. Or maybe he had. Arya felt something inside her close, lock, and seal shut. Not heartbreak, clarity. A clean, cold understanding that she had been fighting enemies on two fronts with. Arya barely slept over the next week. But the exhaustion sharpened her rather than dulled her. She moved through each day with a quiet intensity, her mind calculating, sorting, assembling the evidence she needed. If Calder had set a trap for her, she would build a bigger one around him. One that snapped shut before he even realized he'd stepped inside. She started small, gathering everything Evan had confessed to. She recorded his words on her hidden mic, then cross-matched them with the timestamps on Calder's encrypted messages. The pattern that formed was undeniable, a timeline of betrayal that reached from her living room to the Pentagon. But she knew that evidence from Evan alone wouldn't be enough. She needed someone who understood how corruption seeped into the bones of the system. That was when she contacted Chief Torres, an old teammate who had survived horrific missions with her and knew better than anyone how the military could be twisted from the inside. Torres didn't ask for explanations. He took one look at the documents she sent and said, "I'm in." His voice had the same steadiness as when they'd fought side by side in the desert. He had seen Calder's ambition turn into recklessness before. Now it made sense. The next ally she brought in was Dr. Mina Shah, a cybersecurity specialist whose brilliance was matched only by her ability to keep her mouth shut. Mina had worked with Arya on classified operations and owed her a favor, a life-saving one. When Arya appeared at her door, Mina didn't hesitate. She pulled her inside, locked the door, and whispered, "Tell me who I need to bring down." Together, the three of them crafted a plan. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was surgical. They intercepted Calder's communications with Stoneway Tactical, tracked the flow of money through shell companies, and identified every person tied to the planned cover-up of her mission's ambush. It took nights of coding, decrypting, and covert calls, but eventually, they had enough to crumble an empire. All they needed was the right moment. That moment came when Calder announced a mandatory combat readiness evaluation for Arya. It was a joke, everyone knew it, but he wanted to humiliate her publicly, maybe provoke her into an outburst he could use as grounds for discharge. Instead, Arya saw it as the perfect battlefield. The training arena was filled with officers, cameras, and evaluators. Calder stood at the front, confidence oozing from him like oil. He began the assessment with insults veiled as instructions, pushing her harder, louder, nastier with each command. Arya held her ground, waiting for her cue. When Calder finally stepped too close, raising his voice in a manufactured rage, Arya thumbed the remote hidden in her palm. Instantly, every monitor around the arena flickered. The room grew eerily silent as Calder's emails, financial transfers, and Evan's recorded confession played for everyone to see. Calder froze mid-sentence. Agents entered. Officers stared. The entire base watched the truth unravel in real time. In that moment, Calder's face drained of color. He looked at Arya not with anger, but with fear, real, bone-deep fear, because he finally understood something he had forgotten. A SEAL never fights on only one front, and Arya Hale had never once miscalculated a mission. The hours following Calder's public unraveling were a blur of movement, voices, and the clatter of consequences finally catching up to the people who had orchestrated her downfall. Federal agents spent the rest of the day questioning officers, seizing documents, and locking down servers. Arya watched it all in silence, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, the weight of her restored authority settling over her like armor she'd reforged herself. There was no satisfaction yet, just a hollow, steady calm, the kind that came after a firefight when adrenaline faded and clarity returned. She didn't celebrate, not until everything was truly over. It took 2 days for the official charges to be filed against Calder. Treason, operational sabotage, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Stoneway tactical executives were arrested across multiple states, their offices emptied by investigators. Their corruption had been so woven into the military structure that unraveling it caused shockwaves far beyond Arya's base. But she didn't care about the headlines or the politics. She cared about the men she lost on the mission they had tried to bury. This wasn't just revenge, it was vindication for them. When the military tribunal arrived to escort Calder out, Arya made no effort to hide. She stood in the courtyard as he was walked past her, wrists bound, his once pristine uniform wrinkled and stripped of every ribbon he had ever bragged about. His eyes flicked to hers with something between hatred and desperation. He slowed, as if searching for the right words to wound her with one last time. "This isn't justice," he spat, his voice hoarse. "This is your ego." Arya stepped closer, not out of intimidation but clarity. "No," she said quietly. "This is accountability. If I wanted revenge, Commander, you'd still be out there pretending you had power." She watched the words hit him like strikes. "But justice? That comes from letting the truth burn you from the inside out." Calder looked away first. Evan's fall was quieter, but no less painful. She didn't watch as they removed him from the base. She didn't need to. His betrayal had cut deeper than any weapon, but she refused to let him hold space in her mind any longer. He had made his choices. Now he would live with them. Once the dust settled, her reinstatement came with a formal apology from high command. Her rank, her clearance, her honor, they were all restored. When she put her uniform back on for the first time since Calder ordered her to take it off, she paused to stare at her reflection. Not at the medals, not at the symbols of authority, but at the eyes looking back. Steady, unbroken, fiercer than before. Torres clapped her shoulder. Mina gave her a quiet smile. There were still battles ahead, but she wouldn't face them alone anymore. Later, as she walked across the base under the warm afternoon sun, she passed the chain-link fence where Calder had been taken earlier. The world felt different, lighter, sharper, like something poisonous had finally been carved away. She exhaled